Hello, thanks for tuning into Town Meeting TV's coverage of primary elections 2026. My name is Megan O'Rourke. This program is part of a series of candidate forums hosted by Town Meeting TV in advance of the primary election on August 11th, 2026. These forums are made possible by Town Meeting TV's generous underwriting partners. You can find all of our forums at cctv.org/primary or on our Town Meeting TV YouTube channel, where auto-generated captions are available. If you're tuning in on YouTube, click the subscribe button to stay tuned to local democracy this election season. On tonight's program, we will hear from one of the candidates running for the position of sheriff in Chittenden County. The candidate who has joined us tonight is Kevin Bloom. We also invited Kevin Bloom's Democratic primary challenger, Dan Gamelin, who declined to attend. Kevin, welcome. We have a list of questions prepared for you, and we also will take calls from folks that are watching. If you are watching, 802-862-3966 to call in. Please just make sure that your question is addressed generally to all of the candidates, in this case one. Welcome, Kevin. Please tell us why you are running and what will be different for your constituents if you are elected.
Thank you so much for having me, Meg. It is such an honor to be here, and I really appreciate this opportunity. My name is Kevin Bloom, and I am running for the office of Sheriff of Chittenden County. I am running on a platform of eviction reform through eviction prevention to keep children and families housed, get landlords paid, and create a safer community for all of us. I am the only person running for county sheriff in the state of Vermont who advocates to abolish ICE. We do not need them in our community. We do not need them in any community. And with your vote, I will be the first openly transgender person to serve as an elected sheriff in the history of the United States. My keynote policy is to create a jobs program with a hiring bonus to be offered to tenants' landlords who are facing eviction, and a livable wage which we can leverage to mediate a payment plan to get their landlord paid in full. Eviction is a tool, but it is not a hammer, and every case is not a nail. So if I can just briefly address the empty space at the table with us here today. Our community lost an opportunity to hear from both candidates tonight. I really wish my opponent was here, but he changed his mind and decided to cancel on us. What does it mean when a candidate refuses to participate in the democratic process?
Thanks, Kevin. The first question after the opening statement talks to the role of the sheriff. The Chittenden County Sheriff's Office makes arrests, serves court documents, provides security and fingerprinting services, removes people from homes once eviction notices have been served, and other law enforcement type actions. How do you define public safety as sheriff, and what is the right scope of services for this office to provide?
Thanks, Meg. I really appreciate this question, and I want every viewer to know that a sheriff is not law enforcement. They are elected administrative oversight for civil process. There are 4 narrowly defined definitions of a sheriff in Vermont, and none of them are law enforcement. Law enforcement roles were taken away from sheriffs in 1947 with the formation of the state police. The only reason they make arrests is as a revenue generator, as a private security contractor. Unlike every other part of our government, the sheriff is actually self-funded. Almost none of your tax dollars go to the sheriff. The sheriff is a great example of when your government runs like a business, not a government. The Vermont State Constitution also includes an overly broad definition to preserve peace in your community. What does that mean to me? Well, that means keeping children and families housed, getting landlords paid, and creating a safer community for all of us. There's a 45% increase in evictions in our county in the last 5 years. This is a crisis. The Office of Sheriff exists to flexibly address our community's toughest challenges. And so long as the sheriff fulfills the narrowly defined roles mandated by our state constitution, a sheriff can be whatever we want it to be. I am proposing to address our eviction crisis head-on through a jobs program pairing local employers with tenants facing eviction to build long-lasting, stable solutions.
It's interesting that you mentioned that the sheriff is enshrined in the Constitution, and I'm curious how, when you talk about that this could be, you can make this whatever you want within those narrowly defined parameters. Can you just talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
Then we'll take the call from the...
So there are 4 narrowly defined definitions: prisoner transport and court security, which can only be done by state deputies or transport deputies, as well as serving summons, warrants, eviction papers like civil process, and following lawful writs issued by judges, which basically is just eviction enforcement. But there's also this overly broad definition to preserve peace in your community. And whoever you vote for is whoever decides what that means. Preserve, peace, and community are left up to the interpretation of the elected sheriff.
Great, thank you. Let's go to this call. Answer. Hello, welcome to Town Meeting TV's Election Forum. If you would give us your name and your question, that would be great.
Okay, my name is Winnie Wilkinson of Chittenden County, and my question is for both guests. I am just concerned about both of their relationships with the marginalized community, the Black and Brown community of Chittenden County. Thank you.
Thanks, Winnie.
Thank you so much for the question, Winnie. It is so important for us to be talking about this as candidates. If your government is not working against racism, they are working for it. What I will say to highlight this is that, frankly, this is a competency issue. There is one candidate who makes a statement about racism on their campaign website in this race. It's not my opponent.
Great, thank you. So the next question also refers to the question of law enforcement, which is actually mentioned in the statute. So the word law enforcement is in the statute. I think it's helpful for you to help us understand and see behind that. This is Vermont law allows anyone to run for sheriff regardless of law enforcement background, yet the person elected oversees an office of deputies charged with law enforcement actions. How do you each define this position, and what qualifies someone to do it?
So real quick before I address this really good question, the law enforcement definition is when we talk about security for courts. So the jurisdiction for that law enforcement ends with the walls of the courtroom. So, like I mentioned in my previous response, in Vermont, a sheriff is not charged with law enforcement as their mission. Law enforcement responsibilities were taken away from sheriffs in 1947 with the formation of the state police, as lawmakers reasoned they were both ineffective and easily corruptible. This is still true today. The Chittenden County Sheriff's 2024-2025 audit contained the most material weaknesses, or the largest red flag, that an auditor can give out of any sheriff in Vermont despite stiff competition. I've read the audit. It is alarming. The open corruption in a government document is just astounding. So, the so-called street crimes unit, created by hopefully my predecessor, is an abysmal failure as well. Its expressed intent was to reduce retail theft, which has increased at a linear rate year after year in each year of its existence. Each of Vermont sheriffs engulfed in a salacious scandal in the last few years all came from law enforcement backgrounds. And all this being said, I want to highlight that this office has the potential to represent the values of our community. Ben Cohen, co-founder of Ben & Jerry's, has endorsed our campaign and says I am the right person to fix the financial mess consuming this office in an endless web of personal enrichment grift. I bring integrity as a candidate. This is an elected office for a reason.
Now, you mentioned the auditor's report on the sheriffs, and that did find some financial misuse, but that wasn't with the Chittenden County
No,
Sheriff.
I'm talking about the Chittenden County Sheriff's individual audit.
Separate audit from
Yes.
okay.
Yeah, the auditor's report does not go into detail about the Chittenden County Sheriff, though I sure wish it did. The material weaknesses that the auditor listed in the Chittenden County Sheriff's 2024-2025 audit are so alarming. If we have time, I would love to talk more about them.
We have another call.
Great.
Great. Welcome. You're on Town Meeting TV's election primary forums. Go ahead.
Hi, my name is Katie. I'm calling from Burlington. I appreciate you, Kevin, showing up to this forum, first of all. And my question is, how would you handle people's complaints about repeated low-level offenses that often come from people who are suffering from substance abuse or mental health issues?
Thank you so much for the question. This is a really good question. Crime fundamentally is a function of people's needs not being met. There is no better way to deprive someone of their material needs than to remove them from their housing, especially in winter. I don't think housing alone will fix all of our issues, but almost all of our issues seem to me to be downstream from housing, specifically mental health issues as well as substance use disorder. How is someone going to get better if they don't have a safe indoors place to sleep at night? So as sheriff, my top priority is to maintain housing for people who may lose it through eviction. If we can turn off the eviction to homelessness, specifically child homelessness pipeline, then our social services like the Howard Center will also be able to more effectively manage their caseload. Housing is the root cause here, and that's my prime focus.
Great. Then it's perfect segue to the next question. Evictions have been a topic of discussion in this election, with differing views on the sheriff's role in carrying them out. What do you think voters most need to understand about evictions and the sheriff's office? And if you could help us understand a little bit about, how many evictions, how is that affecting folks in Chittenden County? How many evictions have there been?
Yeah, so before we get into this question, I just want to highlight that this is an extremely opaque issue. The sheriff's office does not collect or share data, and I hope that we have time later to talk about this issue, but what I can speak to is that there is a 45% increase in eviction in our community in the last 5 years. When you look at the eviction data itself, over 70% of these evictions are for non-payment and non-payment alone, half of which are for $2,000 or less. Sometimes we are throwing children and families into the street in the winter without support, over just a couple $100. There's a great 2023 7 Days article where you can ride along with my opponent as he evicts 2 young boys in the middle of winter for $800 in late rent payments. Like I said, eviction is a tool, but it isn't a hammer, and every case isn't a nail. This is a solvable issue. When a child is evicted by the current sheriff, he doesn't even bother to pick up his phone and call their school. 1 in 113 children in Vermont is experiencing homelessness right now, today. Each school district in our county, and I've spoken to almost all of them, has a position called Homelessness Outreach Coordinator, and a large part of their job is just trying to figure out which children are experiencing homelessness before they can even begin to offer their rationed support resources. You might hear someone like my opponent claim that social services work in tandem with eviction enforcement. This is a lie. I've spoke directly to people who work at the Howard Center. I wish it was the truth, but it just isn't factual. Current policy is a knife. Each child eviction is a wound that cuts deep into our community and ripples outwards. And look, landlords are getting a raw deal here too. They end up losing upwards of 9 months of revenue, paying court fees and hiring a lawyer. And the sheriff must address this tenant-landlord dispute either way. Why not build a solution that benefits both landlords, tenants, and our entire community?
Can you talk a little bit about that? Follow up on that just a little bit. What's the solution? What's the alternative model that you want to see built?
I would love to talk about this. Thank you for this question. So, the way that non-payment evictions work is that it first starts with something called a motion for an escrow hearing. Let's imagine that you are my landlord and I haven't paid you and I owe you $2,000. You go down to the courthouse and you file a motion for an escrow hearing where a judge decides, have I paid you rent or not? And within 7 days, if I haven't paid that rent into an escrow, so the court can see me making payments, then 14 days later, a writ of possession, a lawful writ, like is mentioned in the statute, is filed and the sheriff is responsible for enforcing that eviction. Because of the massive backlog in evictions with this 45% increase, that's why it will take upwards of 9 months for the sheriff to get there and actually fulfill this eviction order. My solution is to connect a tenant who is facing eviction with a job with both livable wage and a hiring bonus. So let's say that you're my landlord and the sheriff comes and goes, "Hey Meg, here's $500 today right now. Will you sit down with Kevin at the table and let's mediate a payment plan? They just got a job with a livable wage so they can afford to live in your unit, and for $150 more each month, in 10 months you'll be paid back in full, and rent payments will start next month." The alternative here is you losing tens of thousands of dollars. I think this is a pretty appealing offer to both landlords and tenants, and when you look at the ripple effects of what homelessness does in our community, both to those who it directly affects and our community as a whole, this solution is going to work better for all of us.
Great. Thank you, Kevin. We're going to take one last call, and our time is already running up. Good evening, caller. You're on the air.
Hey, thank you for taking my call. This is Alan, and I'm in Burlington, and I want to kind of build on a couple things that I've heard talked about right now. I really did want to hear responses from both candidates, but it has to do that, the sheriff's office has sort of some broad latitude in what kind of services they provide the community. And it also seems to me that certainly you have a financial audit, but there isn't a lot of direct oversight of the sheriff's office in Vermont, which, kind of says to me there's only kind of two ways that we can go and really evaluate the office. One is through voting, and the second, I guess, would be Freedom of Information Act, whether it's the press or individuals. I guess the sheriff's not there, so I was going to ask the sheriff how they have responded to requests, and I guess I would ask the candidate how they would respond to requests in the office.
So thank you.
That's my question.
I'm hearing your question. It has to do with transparency. How are you going to, what kind of transparency would you have as sheriff, and how would you share with folks in the community how you are meeting constituents' needs?
Well, thank you for this question, Alan. I really appreciate you calling in. And one thing I would like to highlight is that after I started to talk about the material weaknesses in the audit, an individual from our community sent a public records request to the sheriff. And it's a real shame that he's not here to talk about this, because frankly, he just refused to fulfill it. And I would love to hear rationale why, and why he thinks that the public doesn't need to see that information. Specifically, when we look at the material weaknesses in that audit, there is a $29,000 line item for something called unworked client credits. That looks a lot like a no-show security contract to me. There's a $120,000 overstatement in accounts receivable and no system of control over or reporting for use of the company card. Furthermore, this audit is a second draft. The first draft was so bad that the auditor refused to sign off until the budget was corrected by $1.37 million, or 1/4 of the sheriff's budget. How could this happen? The public deserves to see some transparency into that revision.
How would you do it differently?
Yeah. So I, first of all, will follow the law and respond to public records requests. Second of all, I have made a pledge to start sharing information monthly on the sheriff's website so that people don't just have to take my word for it. You can go online and you can see us work in real time. Data does not lie. And I also think that we need to amend our Constitution to have some common sense oversight, regulations, and a recall mechanism for the sheriff. Our state lawmakers tried to do this in the 23-24 session, but every single sheriff advocated against this. Mm-hmm. We need to have a recall mechanism.
There's an impeachment method, right? But no.
Yeah, well, if you look at the case of John Grismore, Franklin County Sheriff, who violently assaulted a handcuffed man.
Yeah.
In that case, you would think impeachment would be possible, but for reasons beyond my understanding, it's not. Impeachment is an inadequate oversight mechanism, and we need an alternative, and the only way to do this is through amending our state constitution, and I will fiercely advocate for that in office.
Okay. We have about 2 minutes left. The last question that we're going to ask, and you can roll this into your closing statement, has to do with party support and differentiation. So what sets you apart from the other candidates seeking this office, seeking this role as the Democratic nomination, and why should Democratic voters choose you over your opponent? And thanks.
Thank you for the question, Meg. So I really, really wish that my opponent was here, because I was going to ask him if he could name a single currently serving Democratic politician who he supports and explain why. My values align with our values as a party. My policies are reflected in the values of the Democratic Party. No one on my team has taken part in transphobic death threats against my opponent on the campaign trail. If they had, I wouldn't lie and claim that they were not a part of my team, and I would apologize to my opponent and use his name in my apology. I am running as a Democrat because I am one, not because it's convenient with the voter demographics in our county. You know, just last week, my opponent went on conservative talk radio to encourage Republicans to cross over and vote for him in the Democratic primary. I am fighting to uplift our community. One candidate points at the past. The other faces our future, ready to meet our community's greatest challenges with values that match our own as Democrats. I understand abuse of power, and I will not stand for it. The status quo is a failure. I'm asking us to be brave. I'm asking us to be bold. And I'm asking us to take a different path to find stable, long-lasting solutions as a community. And I'm asking you, the voter, to come with me. And I hope to earn your vote.
Thanks. And if you have any closing comments for how folks can learn more about you, this would be a great time.
Thanks. Yeah, so you can follow along on social media. You can find me at Bloom4Sheriff and visit my website, bloom4sheriff.com. I would love to hear from folks, so you can either DM me or send me an email. We would love to have you get involved. We are canvassing, we are phone banking, and we are spreading the word throughout our community. A different type of sheriff is possible. We can do this. Please vote on August 11th. It is so important. And thank you so much for having me. It is such an opportunity, and I am so grateful to be here.
Thank you for joining us tonight, Kevin. And thank you all for tuning into Town Meeting TV's ongoing coverage of local candidates' budgets, ballot items, and more. You can find this and many more forums at cctv.org/primary or on Town Meeting TV's YouTube channel, youtube.com/townmeetingtv. Don't forget to cast your ballot on August 11th. Polls are open 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. and we have same-day voter registration in Vermont. If you can't be there on August 11th, you can show up at your city clerk office and vote right there in person. They will not be mailing ballots home for the primary election, so don't wait for one to show up at your door. Thanks for watching, and good night.